Hi everyone, and welcome to this guide to setting up your very own encrypted DNS server. Now, before I begin, I want to note that I'm going to be doing this on a Debian 12 server that I got over here that I'm accessing over SSH. I'm going to be installing a program called Blocky DNS. I'm going to run you through all the steps on how to do that and whatnot. But before I begin, I'm going to show why you'd want to do this, why you want a DNS server in the first place, and why you'd want it to be encrypted. So to begin with, we have my favorite little guy over here, Billy, that I always use in my examples. So today, Billy is trying to access Denshi.org. And as you can see, he's typed it into his computer. And what happens under the normal DNS protocol is that this website name, Denshi.org, gets sent over to the DNS server as a plain text request. Because this is a plain text request, anybody can actually fake this request, which means that if for whatever reason you contact the wrong DNS server without even knowing it, like somebody changes the DNS server on your computer, or what happens is maybe somebody's able to spoof the DNS server address, then what happens is you might get a response from a fake DNS server, which is illustrated here in red, and get a bad response, which might send you to the wrong website perhaps. Now, the other problem with this being a plain text request is that anybody on the network who's monitoring your requests can actually see their contents. So here we have an attacker, as symbolized by these angry red eyes over here, and as you can see, he's saying, he's accessing Denshi.org because the attacker is able to see your plain text request. Now, this can be solved by using encrypted DNS protocols, of which there are two, DNS over HTTPS and DNS over TLS. We'll go into the details on those differences as we're installing them, but really in practice they're the same. What matters is that the request that you're sending and the response you get are both encrypted. And by virtue of being encrypted, they have to be signed with an encryption certificate. They're encrypted with a specific certificate that's given to the DNS server that anybody can get for their own DNS server, but that ensures that that DNS server is exactly who it claims to be, which means that you cannot spoof this, at least not without some incredibly powerful decryption computer that probably only the NSA has if they do have it. Because of this encryption, it also means that any attackers cannot see your DNS requests. However, I put an asterisk over here because in practice, they can still see the IP addresses that your computer is accessing. So for example, a school, say, or a work network would be able to see every single IP address you access because, well, it's your network. It has to be able to serve you those IP addresses, which means it has to know them. Anyways, with all that covered, the other very big reason you'd want to run your own DNS server is to block stuff. So here we have Billy back at it again. Now it seems that since our last developments, Billy must have gotten married, which means that he now has this little kid. It kind of looks like a baby, which is weird because no babies should be with a phone at all, but just assume this is like, I don't know, like a 15-year-old or something like that. And this kid over here is trying to access Instagram. And Billy, is an irresponsible parent that lets his kids on social media. You shouldn't do that. And so what happens is, because Billy is using a commercial DNS server on his kid's phone, they send Instagram.com to that DNS server, and the DNS server responds with an appropriate DNS response, which is, of course, the IP address. Now, this means that the website is not blocked on the kid's phone and they can access whatever they want. Now, you may want in your household or on your kids' devices or even on your own device to block some kind of websites. To do that, you can use your own DNS server. So in this second example, as you can see, Billy has set up a custom DNS server and he set it up on his kid's phone. So the kid tries to access Instagram.com. There's a reply that comes back from the DNS server. That reply is 0000, which obviously is nothing. That doesn't lead to anything. That's a null address. And the kid says, guess I'll have to go outside or something. So essentially, this makes Billy a responsible parent. I'm showcasing this example because it is desirable in some cases, like for example at work or school, or even like, in your own household or on your own devices or whatever, to block certain websites. And to do that, the best way is to set up a DNS server. Alright, so now that we understand the theory behind setting up a DNS server, let's actually go and do it. The first thing we're going to need is a program called Dig. So Dig essentially lets you send requests to DNS servers just to test them out, and we're going to be using Dig to test our own DNS server out. To install Dig, at least on Debian, you're going to run apt install and then DNS utils, just like that. So I'm going to press enter, and as you can see, I've already gotten installed. So I'm going to run Dig, and then the name of a website, like let's say Google.com, and then I'm going to use the @ key over here to specify the DNS server I want. So some popular DNS servers include 9.9.9.9, that's the quad 9 one. Let's see how fast that takes to respond. I'm gonna press enter, and as you can see, wow, that was 0 milliseconds apparently. I think it must have been cached, which means that it was already loaded beforehand on the computer. Let's try a different one. Let's do 1.1.1.1. And as you can see, it took 4 milliseconds, so a little bit slower. And now let's do 8.8.8.8. That's actually the Google DNS server. And as you can see, it responded, and it seems that it took it 4 milliseconds. So like a little bit middle of the road. I'm seeing that value over here, by the way. I'm just gonna highlight it on the screen. So the important section here is the answer section, which is the DNS answer the server gives back. As you can see, it's giving back google.com. 130 is like, I think it's like the refresh rate on it. I don't remember exactly. And as you can see, it's an A address, which means it's a direct IP address association. And we have the actual IP address here. So later what we're gonna do is we're gonna dig some websites that we don't like, and we're gonna make sure that they're blocked on our DNS server, which we're gonna set up in just a second. All right, so to begin with, let's actually set up a place where we can download the Blocky program. So I'm gonna make a directory in the OPT, in the /OPT folder. I'm gonna call it Blocky, and I'm gonna use CD to go into that directory. So I'm gonna CD OPT, I don't know why I have my caps lock on, OPT Blocky, just like that. Now I'm gonna copy paste this big block of code. All this code really does is download the latest release of Blocky. You can either copy paste this, or you can actually go to the releases page on GitHub, scroll down all the way down, and go to the releases and select the Linux x86-64 release over here. So I'm gonna right click on this, I'm gonna copy link, and I'm gonna run curl-f capital L capital O, and then I'm gonna put quotation marks. I'm gonna put the URL in there. I'm gonna just press enter and just give it a second. It's gonna start downloading. All right, there it is. And if we run ls, as you can see, we have this tar.gz file. Now I'm gonna run tar xvf and then Blocky. Just type Blocky and press tab. It will autocomplete it for you, and I'm gonna press enter. And as you can see, it's extracted 3 files: license, readme, and Blocky. All we really care about is Blocky over here. I'm gonna remove the tar file as well by using rm-rf over there. So yeah, as you can see, we only have Blocky left over. So now that we have that, we can go down and start configuring it. So I'm gonna make a new file using my favorite text editor, Vim. I'm gonna type in config.yaml, that's the default config file name. And I'm just gonna copy paste the existing configuration from the guide here. You don't really need to change a lot of stuff in here. I do think that maybe these DNS servers might need to be changed out. So these upstream DNS servers are essentially the DNS servers your DNS server is going to be using to fetch requests. These can either be encrypted or unencrypted. I'm just going to use 9.9.9.9, and I'm going to use, I'm going to add one here by adding a dash and type 1.1.1.1. That's the Cloudflare one. I'm just going to use those because those are pretty popular. Now you can go and set up your own custom ones here and whatnot, which would probably be better, but I'm just going to use the popular ones. Anyways, as for the ports configuration, as you can see, it's got 53, 4000, and 853. So 53 and 853, these are actually going to face the outside world, while 4000, we're going to make it so this one actually needs to be accessed via a proxy. I'm going to show you guys how to do that, but we'll worry about that in just a second. And then down here we have logging. We're going to use this in the first half to make sure that our requests are working, but then we're going to change it back to error when we're done to make sure that our logs don't get too filled up. Because if we set this to info, when we run the program, it's basically going to spit out a bunch of information that we really don't want. And it's also going to log every request, which, I mean, unless you're like a megalomaniac and need to see every single little thing people are using your DNS server for, is probably not best for privacy. So I'm going to close this and I'm going to move on. To actually run the Blocky program, we're going to create a user named Blocky, and we're going to give that user this directory as the home directory. So I'm going to run user add with 2 Ds -d opt Blocky, and then the name Blocky, just like that. Now we're going to create a service that this user is going to run that actually runs the Blocky program. So I'm going to use Vim. I'm going to go into etc systemd system and then blocky.service. That's what I'm going to name it. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to basically copy paste the guide's default one, because this is essentially everything we need. As you can see, it's going to restart every 2 seconds if it fails, and it's going to run under the user and group named Blocky. It's going to run an opt Blocky, and it's going to run the Blocky executable we downloaded with that config we created. So with that set up, we're going to start working on our first encrypted protocol. So to set up the DNS over HTTPS protocol, which isn't necessarily required, but if you want to use it in Google Chrome, you will need this because Google Chrome makes you use this for a custom DNS response. To do that, we're basically going to need Nginx configured. If you want to learn how to configure Nginx, go watch my previous video on Nginx. I'm not going to go through all of the details today, but I will show the basic things you need to do to set it up. So if you don't already have it installed, all you got to do is run apt install Nginx, and we're going to want to install Python 3-certbot-nginx. So I already have these installed, but just make sure you have those two programs installed. Then you're going to go and using Vim, I'm going to go into etc nginx sites-enabled and then dns.denshi.org. You can name this file whatever you want. I'm going to name it after the domain I've picked, which is going to be dns.denshi.org. That's just the website I chose to use. Obviously, you can use yours or you can use any name here because it reads all of these regardless. I'm going to press enter and I'm going to just copy paste the default configuration over here, which is pretty much fine. Now remember when I mentioned that 4000 port over here? So here it is again. It's showing up under the location proxy, which means that this DNS server essentially is going to proxy this under its /. So at its base root address, it's going to forward all the responses to this port, which is running on our computer as Blocky. Now I'm also going to change the server name to my actual address, which in this case is going to be dns.denshi.org. This doesn't have to start with DNS. It can be pretty much anything you want, but I'm going to name it that because it's pretty easy and convenient. Anyways, with that set up, we now need to set up the certificates. So I mentioned previously that your DNS server is going to be certified with encryption certificates, and to obtain those certified certificates, we need to actually use a program called certbot. So I'm going to run certbot -nginx, which means it's going to automatically configure our Nginx server, -d, and then the name of our DNS server, which is going to be dns.denshi.org. So if you press enter, it's going to start doing some stuff. It might prompt you for your email. You can just skip that really. It seems I already have one installed, so I'm going to do I'm going to do renew and replace, which is probably the best option. You probably won't get that prompt if you're doing this. Don't worry if you get an error on deploy hook, that's probably fine. And as you can see, it's going to save the certificate at etc let's encrypt live, and then the name of your domain, and then fullchain.pem and privkey.pem. We're going to go back and grab these later. It's also going to give you an expiry date, which as you can see is in March in 2025, so we don't really have to worry about that. Now that we've grabbed the certificate, if we go back into that file from before, as you can see, there's a lot more stuff. This is that Nginx file we set up. It's added a bunch of lines that say managed by certbot, which essentially control encryption on your server. All this does is make it so anybody trying to access dns.denshi.org will use an encrypted connection, which, you know, is pretty important. Anyways, with that covered, we're now going to move on to setting up DNS over TLS. So remember how I mentioned remembering that, you know, that priv key and full chain thing? That's going to come in handy here. So I'm going to make a new directory. I'm going to mkdir -p to make sure I'm not creating any, you know, unknown directories. opt Blocky and then certs. I'm going to make a directory called certs essentially. That's going to show up over here. Now to get files into this directory, I'm going to run cp or copy etc let's encrypt live dns.denshi.org full chain. I'm going to copy them to the certs directory, as you can see. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do the same exact command, but instead of full chain, I'm going to copy over the priv key file. So now if we list the contents of the certs directory, there's a full chain and a priv key file. Now at this point, since we've basically put all the files we want in here, I'm going to run chown-r Blocky, Blocky, and then opt Blocky. All this line does is make it so all the files in the opt Blocky directory are owned by the Blocky user and Blocky group, which makes it possible for the Blocky user to actually run this stuff when we eventually run this as a service with systemd. The other thing we might want to do is run this command. I'm going to just copy paste it over here, but all this command does with setcap is make it possible for the Blocky executable to access ports that are below the number 1000. Which is needed because it's going to use the port 53 for traditional DNS operation. So I'm going to just press enter over here, and as you can see, it's pretty much ran without any errors. Anyways, I'm going to use the Vim program once again to edit my config file. At the very bottom of the file, wherever you want, I'm going to add the cert file and key file values that we already had. So the full chain for the cert file and the priv key file for the key file option. So this is really important. This is going to make it so DNS over TLS functions properly. So just make sure that you have this in your config. Speaking of things you want in your config, we got to set up some sites to block. Blocky will block pretty much anything that you want it to, so long as you tell it what you want it to block in a file. The way that file has to be formatted is the same as your host's file. So I'm going to make a new one over here. I'm going to call it blocked sites. I'm going to just put it in the same directory. And the way this works is you type the IP address you want and the website. So for example, let's say we want to block, I don't know, Reddit. I wish it was blocked worldwide, but unfortunately it isn't. Let's make it blocked on our DNS server. So I'm going to run 0.0.00. I'm going to type 0.0.0.0, which is where we want it to redirect. And then you put the name of the website. So reddit.com. You can also add multiple lines, so let's do another one, 0.0.0.0, www.reddit, or I guess I gotta put a .reddit.com. Or let's say we want to do Instagram, www.instagram.com, or whatever it is. So you can keep filling this up with more stuff. You can actually download them online. I'm going to show you guys how you can get this program to automatically download new IP addresses that it wants to block, or new websites to block, but this is going to be our little example. Anyways, going back into the config, we're going to go and create a new section at the bottom over here that's called blocking. And in here, we're going to add a section called deny lists. So here we need to name our deny lists. I'm going to call it blocked stuff or whatever, and I'm going to add an option over here, and I'm going to put the name of the file. So if you recall correctly, the file is named block sites. So in there, I'm going to just put opt blocky blocked sites. Anyway, so the bottom here, we're going to add the actual lists we're going to be enforcing. So I'm going to type client groups block, just like that. I'm going to add default, so the default configuration for what to block. And as an entry, I'm going to add blocked stuff. So essentially, we need to add this here because it's here in the deny list, but we're not actually enabling it until we set it up here in the default section. Now, we can make more than one of these. So for example, I'm going to make a new one called, I don't know, Luke Smith URLs or Luke Smith sites. Now the reason I'm making this is because you don't necessarily have to put a file path here. You can actually put a URL. So I'm going to copy paste this URL over here. This is this raw GitHub user content URL that I got off of the Luke Smith GitHub. And what this has is a bunch of ads and websites and social media stuff that it blocks. So with this URL, what's going to happen is Blocky is going to automatically download that content from GitHub, and it's going to automatically block everything on that list. By the way, if you want to see what that list actually looks like, it looks something like this. It's absolutely gigantic, as you can probably imagine. So yeah, might take a little bit to download, but it has a bunch of websites actually that we'd want to block. Anyways, I'm going to add that to our default list. So I'm going to add a new entry over here called Luke Smith Sites. Which just represents that entry we added to the deny lists. Once again, the client groups block section over here just shows what we need to block specifically. All right, so now with that done, let's actually test our DNS server before we start and actually running it as a server. Let's make sure it functions correctly. So to test our server, I'm going to do ./blocky to run the executable -c config.yaml to make sure it's taking the right config. I'm going to press enter, and okay, it's given me some kind of error, but it seems to be functioning right. It's got a bunch of, okay, apparently a bunch of people are accessing it. I don't know how, but essentially we're getting a bunch of requests and it's showing that it's working. It's green, which is good. We now have a functioning DNS server. I'm going to run systemctl start blocky, and then I'm going to run journalctl -feu blocky. As you can see, the log is working through systemd. Just make sure that this is working by systemd. I'm going to close it, and now I'm going to test out whether it actually blocks the servers we want it to. So I'm going to run dig and then reddit.com, which if you guys remember, we blocked using our block list. I'm going to do @ and then 127.0.0.1, which is just the IP address for our DNS server. Since we're running this on the actual server, it's just a local address. So I'm going to press enter, and as you can see, it gave a response in 4 milliseconds. It took it, and the response is 0000. So yes, Reddit is effectively blocked. All right, so that's all fine and dandy and all, but let's actually see if this works as an encrypted DNS server. So I'm going to open up Google Chrome over here. It's asking me to make it the default browser. I'm not going to do that because I do not want to use Google Chrome. Do not sign me in. I don't want to use your terrible for privacy browser. But one thing that Google Chrome does have going for it is an encrypted DNS option. So if you go into the settings over here, the little 3-button menu, and go to the settings, you can go down to the privacy and security section and go down, I believe it's somewhere in security over here. You scroll down and it should have a section on use secure DNS. Here it is. So as you can see, it's enabled, but it's using the OS default value, and it gives you the option of Google's, Cloudflare's, OpenDNS, whatever, but we want to use a custom one. So I'm going to click add custom DNS, and here we have to put a special URL. So the way this works is we're going to type in https://dns.denshi.org or whatever your address is, and then /DNS-query. So if you do that and it doesn't give us any errors, if it goes red, then you've messed it up. But if it doesn't give you any errors, that means that it is working. So now that we've set that up and we have this all enabled and whatnot, if we try to go to reddit.com, it should, yeah, there you go. It gives us an error. It doesn't access it. We did it, Reddit. We literally blocked Reddit. So we actually set this up as the default DNS provider, which means that any blocking stuff that we do on our server will be in this browser. So if your kids are using Google Chrome or whatever, just set this up on their computer and you can block what they're accessing, or, if you're employees or whatever you want to use this for. However, I'm not done yet. Let me show you how to set it up on your Android phone. So over here, I have an Android phone running Android 12, although the steps are pretty much the same on whatever Android phone you may want to use. So this is going to use DNS over TLS. We're going to go into network and internet over here. We're going to scroll down to where it says private DNS, and we're going to click on it. Now, as you can see, it's giving me a select private DNS mode. I'm going to click private DNS provider hostname, and here I'm going to type in my hostname, which is dns.denshi.org. And we're going to press save. So if it doesn't give you any errors, because it might give up a notification with an error or something, if it doesn't give you any errors, that means that it worked. So let's go test it out on our browser. So now that I'm in my browser, I'm going to try to go to reddit.com. And as you can see, it is blocked. It is not accessible because we succeeded in setting up the DNS server. Thank you so much for watching this video on setting up an encrypted DNS server. I hope you enjoyed it. I've been Denshi. Goodbye.